I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end. And comment the city you're watching from. My son called me on a Thursday evening, 3 days before the grand opening of his restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina. His voice had that tight, controlled tone he always used when he was about to deliver bad news wrapped in politeness. Mom, we need to talk about Sunday. I was sitting on the porch of my little house in Beaufort, watching the sun drop behind the marsh grass. In my lap was a recipe binder, the one my late husband kept in his nightstand for 30 years. The one with coffee stains on the cover and notes scribbled in margins. The one my son had no idea I'd finally found. I know about the menu, Ethan, I said quietly. There was a long silence, the kind that tells you everything. What do you mean? He asked. I mean, I know which recipes you're using, and I know you don't want me at the opening. Another silence. Then his wife's voice in the background, sharp and impatient. Just tell her. Ethan. He cleared his throat. Mom, it's not that we don't want you there. It's just the investor dinner is very specific. Caroline's parents are hosting, and the guest list is exclusive? I offered. Curated, he said. That was his wife's word. Caroline loved that word. Curated closet, curated social circle, curated life. And I apparently had not made the cut. 3 days later, that recipe binder would be on the table at his investor dinner. It would expose a lie he'd been telling for 2 years. And it would teach my son that the mother he'd been hiding had given him every single thing that made his dream possible. But let me go back to where this really started. I woke up at 5 every morning because that's what 40 years of nursing does to your body. Even 3 years into retirement, my internal clock didn't care that I no longer had a shift to get to. I'd make coffee, sit at the kitchen table, and talk to my husband's photograph. Morning, Frank. Cardinals are back at the feeder. He'd been gone 8 years. Heart attack at 61, right there in the kitchen. Standing at the stove making his famous shrimp and grits. Dropped like someone had cut his strings. I'd done CPR for 11 minutes before the ambulance arrived. 11 minutes of pressing on the chest of the man I'd loved since I was 19, knowing somewhere deep that he was already gone. After Frank died, I kept the house. Small yellow cottage on Boundary Street. 2 bedrooms. Screened porch. A garden out back, where I grew tomatoes and basil. Frank's mother had left it to us. It wasn't much, but it was paid off, and on a nurse's pension, that mattered. Ethan had been 24 when his father died, already finished culinary school, already working at a restaurant in Atlanta. He'd come home for the funeral, stayed a week, then gone back to his life. I didn't blame him. Grief hits young men differently. They run from it. He ran all the way to Charleston, where he met Caroline Ashford at a wine tasting event. She was the daughter of Richard and Judith Ashford, who owned a chain of upscale seafood restaurants along the Carolina coast. The Ashford name was on buildings, on charity boards, on the society pages of Charleston Magazine. When Ethan told me about Caroline, his voice had that breathless quality I hadn't heard since he was a boy opening Christmas presents. Mom, she's incredible. Smart, beautiful, connected. Her family knows everyone in the restaurant industry. I'm happy for you, sweetheart. Tell me about her. She went to the College of Charleston, double major in business and hospitality. She runs the marketing for her family's restaurants now. They're opening 2 new locations next year. She sounds accomplished. She is. And Mom, her parents, they're offering to invest in my own restaurant. My heart lifted. Ethan, that's wonderful. Your father would be so proud. There was a pause. Yeah, he said. Yeah, he would. But something in his voice had shifted. I filed it away and didn't push. When I finally met Caroline 6 months later, she drove down to Beaufort in a white Range Rover and wore sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Ethan walked her through the front door of my little cottage, and I watched her eyes scan everything. The worn carpet, the secondhand furniture, the kitchen with its 20-year-old appliances. This is so charming, she said. The way you'd compliment a child's crayon drawing. Thank you. It's home. I held out my hand. I'm so glad to meet you, Caroline. Her handshake was brief, precise. Ethan talks about your cooking all the time. That's sweet. Frank and I loved cooking together. It was our thing. She smiled politely. Ethan mentioned his father was a cook and a fishing boat captain, I said. He ran charters out of Port Royal Sound for 20 years. Before that, he was in the Navy. Then he came home and said the only two things worth doing were catching fish and cooking them. Interesting, Caroline said, in a tone that meant the opposite. Over lunch, which I'd spent 2 days preparing, she checked her phone 11 times. I counted. Ethan kept glancing at her, monitoring her reactions, translating my world for her. Mom's garden tomatoes are actually really good. This cornbread is her specialty. The house has character. That word. Character. The same word real estate agents use for houses that need work. When Caroline went to the bathroom, Ethan leaned across the table. She's just nervous, he whispered. Meeting parents is hard. She seems lovely, I said carefully. She is. And Mom, her family is really going to help my career. I just need you to understand that they're different from us. How so? They're searched for the word formal. Okay. And they care about image, presentation, first impressions. I looked at my son, this boy I'd raised through hurricanes and heartbreak, who'd learned to cook standing on a step stool beside his father, who used to catch blue crabs off the dock and bring them home in a bucket, grinning like he'd won the lottery. What are you asking me, Ethan? Just to be yourself, he said. But, you know, maybe a polished version. I nodded, smiled, set down my fork. That was the first time he asked me to be less than I was, and I let it go. Mothers do that. We absorb small wounds because we think it keeps our children safe. Over the next 2 years, the wounds accumulated. The first Christmas, he didn't come home. Too busy with the Ashfords' holiday gala, the birthday card he sent 3 weeks late, the phone calls that got shorter, less frequent, more distracted. The way he stopped saying, I love you at the end of conversations and started saying, talk soon instead. But the real shift happened when Ethan announced his restaurant concept. He called me on a random Tuesday night. More animated than I'd heard him in months. Mom, we're doing it. Richard is investing. We're opening a restaurant in downtown Charleston. The Ashfords are putting up the capital, and I'm the executive chef. That's incredible, sweetheart. What's the concept? Low country cuisine. Elevated. Farm to table with a Southern Soul Food Foundation. My heart swelled. Like your father's cooking. He paused. It's more refined than that, Mom. We're talking tasting menus, wine pairings. James Beard level ambition. Your father made the best shrimp and grits I've ever tasted, I said. That's low country cuisine at its finest. Yeah, but this is different. This is professional. I let that one land. Professional. As opposed to what Frank did, which was apparently amateur, despite 30 years of feeding people food that made them close their eyes and groan with happiness. What's the restaurant called? I asked. The Heritage Table, he said, named after the Ashford family motto. Preserving heritage through hospitality. Whose heritage? I asked. He didn't answer that. The restaurant was set to open in June. I learned this from the Charleston Post and Courier website, not from my son. There was a feature article about it. Up-and-coming chef Ethan Mercer and the Ashford family bring elevated low-country dining to King Street. I read the article twice. Ethan was quoted talking about his culinary philosophy. I believe in honoring tradition while pushing it forward. My approach to Southern cooking comes from years of studying the craft, understanding the roots, and reimagining them for a modern audience. No mention of Frank. No mention of the man who'd taught him to make roux at age 7. No mention of the recipes that had been in our family for 3 generations, starting with Frank's grandmother, who'd cooked for a family in Savannah before opening her own food stand in Beaufort in 1952. I read the article a 3rd time, looking for my name. Found it in the last paragraph. Mercer, who grew up in Beaufort, credits his upbringing for instilling a love of Southern food. I was his upbringing, not even a name. I drove to Charleston for the soft opening. Ethan hadn't invited me. I'd found out about it from a mutual friend of ours from Beaufort, Linda Grayson, whose daughter worked in Charleston food media. Maggie, Linda said on the phone, I don't want to overstep, but did you know Ethan's restaurant had a soft opening last weekend? No, I didn't. Linda was quiet for a moment. The menu, Maggie. Have you seen the menu? No. You should look at it. It's on their website. I hung up and opened my laptop. The Heritage Table's website was sleek, gorgeous, photos of the restaurant interior, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs and reclaimed wood. The staff page had Ethan's photo with a bio that mentioned the College of Culinary Arts in Atlanta, his years working in fine dining, his partnership with the Ashford family. Nothing about Beaufort, nothing about his father. I clicked on the menu, and my heart stopped. Granny May's shrimp and grits, Frank's smoked oyster stew, the Mercer family red rice, Aunt Della's she-crab soup, low country boil with Frank's secret seasoning blend. Every single signature dish on that menu was a recipe from my husband's family. Recipes Frank had perfected over decades. Recipes he'd written down in that binder he kept in his nightstand. Recipes I thought had been lost when I'd cleaned out Frank's things after the funeral and couldn't find the binder anywhere. My son had taken them. He'd taken his father's recipes, repackaged them with prettier names, and built an entire restaurant on them without telling me, without crediting Frank, without acknowledging where any of it came from. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that, looked at Frank's photograph on the wall. They're using your recipes, I said to him. Our boy took your life's work and put his name on it. Frank smiled back at me from the photo. That easy, confident smile he always had, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. I spent the next week trying to reach Ethan. Called 4 times, texted twice, got 1 response. Busy with prep for the opening. Talk soon. Talk soon. Always talk soon, never talk now. On Wednesday, I did something I'd been putting off for 8 years. I went into the attic. Frank's things were up there in boxes I'd packed after the funeral and never opened. I hadn't been able to face them, but now I climbed that pull-down ladder and sat on the plywood floor surrounded by my husband's life in cardboard. The 3rd box I opened had his fishing gear, Old Navy patches, and at the bottom, a large manila envelope sealed with tape. Frank's handwriting on the front read for Maggie, "When you're ready." I hadn't found this during the move because I'd never opened these boxes. I just carried them up and closed the hatch. For 8 years, this envelope had been waiting for me. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, a business card, and a thick stack of legal documents. The letter was in Frank's handwriting. Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry for that. I need to tell you something I should have told you while I was alive, but I was waiting for the right time, and I guess the right time never came. Remember when Mama died in 2012 and I told you her estate was just the house and some savings? That wasn't the whole truth. Mama also owned the building at 274 King Street in Charleston. She bought it in 1987 with money she'd saved over 40 years from her catering business. She never told anyone except me. Mama was smart, Maggie. Smarter than any of us knew. The building has 4 commercial units. They've been leased to various businesses for decades. A property management company handles everything, and the income goes into an account I set up. The details are in the attached documents. I also did something else. I registered all our family recipes with the U.S. Copyright Office. Every recipe in my binder. All 47 of them. The registrations are in the documents. The recipes belong to the Mercer Family Trust, which I set up with you as the sole trustee. Nobody can use them commercially without your written permission. I did this because I knew our recipes were special. Mama's recipes, my recipes. They're worth something, and I wanted to make sure they stayed in the family's control. I know this is a lot. Call James Calloway at the number on the business card. He's been managing everything since I set it up. He'll explain it all. I love you, Maggie. I always will. Take care of our boy, but don't forget to take care of yourself too. Yours, Frank. I sat in that attic holding my husband's letter and crying so hard my chest hurt, not from grief this time, or not only from grief, from the overwhelming realization that Frank had been protecting me from beyond the grave. And I'd almost missed it. I called James Calloway the next morning at 8 sharp. Mrs. Mercer, he said with warmth in his voice. I've been managing your affairs for quite some time. I was beginning to think you'd never call. I need to understand what I have, I said. Mercer is a 4-unit commercial building on King Street in Charleston, currently appraised at approximately $2.8 million. 3 units are leased. The 4th has been vacant for about a year. And the tenants? 2 long-term tenants, an art gallery and a law firm. And 1 tenant who signed a lease about 2 years ago. A restaurant group, the Heritage Table LLC. My breath caught. That's my son's restaurant. Yes, ma'am. I'm aware. James paused. Mrs. Mercer. There's something else you should know. The restaurant's lease was signed by Ashford Hospitality Group on behalf of the Heritage Table. The lease has a specific clause, one your husband insisted on in the original building lease template, that prohibits the commercial use of any intellectual property belonging to the Mercer Family Trust without separate written authorization, meaning if your son's restaurant is using recipes that belong to your trust, which based on the menu I've seen they clearly are, they're in violation of their lease. They could face termination of the lease, and the trust could pursue damages for unauthorized commercial use. I sat with that for a long moment. How much rent do they pay? $6,000 a month. And they're current? James hesitated. They were until 3 months ago. They're now 2 months behind. Reason given was renovation overruns for the opening. The Ashford's attorney requested a 60-day extension. Did you grant it? Mrs. Mercer, I don't have the authority. Only the trustee can authorize a deferment. You're the trustee, and I never authorized anything. Correct. So there's no deferment? No, ma'am. They owe $12,000 in back rent, and they're using your family's recipes without permission. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for an hour. Then I called Ethan. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding distracted. Kitchen sounds behind him. Pots clanging, someone shouting orders. Mom, I'm in the middle of prep. Can this wait? No, I said. It can't. Something in my voice must have registered, because the background noise faded. He'd stepped away. What's wrong? I know about the recipes, Ethan. Which recipes? Don't do that. I found your father's papers. All of them. The copyright registrations, the trust, everything. Silence. You took his recipe binder from the house after the funeral, I said. Before I could find it, you built your entire restaurant on his recipes without telling me. Mom, I can explain. You've been using them commercially without authorization from the trust. That's a legal violation. It's not like that. I also know about 274 King Street. The silence that followed was absolute. Mom, your restaurant is in my building, Ethan. My building that your father's mother bought in 1987. My building that Frank left to me. You've been paying rent to my property manager for 2 years, and you never thought to mention it? I didn't know it was yours. You knew the building was owned by the Mercer Family Trust. Your name is Mercer. Your father's name is on the trust documents. He was quiet for a long time. Then, very softly, he said, Caroline said it was probably just a coincidence. A family with the same name. Did she? Or did she know exactly whose building it was and hope I'd never find out? Mom, please. The opening is Sunday. Richard and Judith are bringing investors. This is the biggest night of my career. Everything I've worked for. Everything your father worked for. I corrected. That his mother worked for. That 3 generations of Mercers put their hands and hearts into, and not one of them got a mention on your website, your menu, or your press interviews. His breathing was ragged. I was going to tell you. When When it was too late to matter? When the restaurant was established enough that you didn't need the recipes anymore? When you'd laundered our family legacy into your personal brand? That's not fair. What's not fair is being erased from my own son's life so he can impress his in-laws. I'm not erasing you. You didn't invite me to the opening. That was the investor dinner. Is specific. Say what you mean, Ethan. Caroline's parents don't think you fit the brand. Mom, they think a retired nurse from Beaufort would confuse the narrative. The narrative that you're a self-made culinary genius who developed these recipes yourself? He didn't answer. Goodbye, Ethan. I'll see you Sunday. Mom, wait. You are coming? I'm the landlord and the owner of every recipe on your menu. I think I have a right to attend. I hung up before he could respond. I met with James Calloway the next morning. His office was in a quiet building on Broad Street. Warm wood and old maps on the walls. He had everything laid out for me. The property deed, the lease agreements, the recipe copyright registrations, the trust documents, all meticulously maintained. Your husband was a careful man, James said. He set all of this up specifically to protect you and your family's legacy. I read through everything. The lease for the heritage table was clear. No use of Mercer Family Trust intellectual property without written consent from the trustee. The recipes were registered. The trust was ironclad. What are my options? I asked. James laid them out. Option 1. Authorize the recipe, use retroactively. Negotiate a licensing fee. Renew the lease. Everyone moves forward. Option 2. Deny authorization. Issue a cease and desist on the recipes. Allow the lease to continue but strip the menu. Option 3. Terminate the lease for violations and back rent. Deny recipe authorization entirely. They'd have to close. I don't want to destroy my son's dream, I said, but I won't be invisible anymore. James nodded. There's a fourth option. Tell me. You attend the opening, you let it happen, and then you present your terms, publicly, so there's no room for revisionist history from the Ashfords. I thought about it. What kind of terms? James pulled out a document he'd already drafted. This requires the heritage table to formally credit all Mercer family recipes on the menu, in all press materials, and on the restaurant website. It establishes a licensing agreement at fair market value. It requires the back rent be paid within 30 days, and it names you as a culinary consultant to the restaurant with a permanent seat on the advisory board. He paused. It also requires a public acknowledgement at the opening dinner, a toast to the Mercer family, to Frank, to his mother May, to the legacy that made the restaurant possible. That's what I want, I said. Not revenge, recognition. James smiled. Your husband told me you'd say something like that. Sunday evening. I drove to Charleston in the dress I'd bought for myself that morning. Not expensive, but beautiful. Deep blue, elegant. The kind of dress that says, I know exactly who I am. I'd had my hair done, put on the gold earrings Frank gave me for our 30th anniversary. When I pulled up to 274 King Street, my building, valets were parking Lexuses and BMWs. The restaurant glowed through the tall windows. Inside, I could see white tablecloths, candlelight, people in expensive clothes holding wine glasses. I walked to the entrance. A young woman with a clipboard met me at the door. Name, please? Margaret Mercer. She scanned her list, frowned. I'm sorry, I don't see you on the guest list. I'm the chef's mother, I said. And the building's owner. She blinked. Let me get the manager. A moment later, Caroline appeared. She wore a black dress, pearls, hair perfectly pinned. Her smile was immediate and false. Maggie, what a surprise. Ethan didn't mention you were coming. Ethan knows I'm coming. We spoke Thursday. Caroline's smile tightened. Tonight is really more of an investor event. Richard and Judith have been planning this for months. The guest list is, I believe the word is curated, I said. Caroline's eyes hardened. I stepped past her into the restaurant. It was stunning, I had to admit. The space had been transformed. Exposed brick walls, copper light fixtures, an open kitchen where Ethan and his team worked with focused intensity. The menu was displayed on a large chalkboard near the entrance. I read it. Every dish, every recipe, every flavor profile. It was all Frank, all May, all Mercer, with not a single credit given. Richard Ashford spotted me from across the room. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing the kind of suit that costs more than my car. He leaned over to Judith, whispered something. She looked at me with an expression I recognized immediately. The same look Caroline had given my house. Charming, dismissive. I took a seat at the bar, ordered a glass of water, watched. The room filled with Charleston's food elite. Restaurant critics, investors, social media influencers, local business owners. Richard gave a speech about vision and excellence and the Ashford commitment to culinary innovation. He introduced Ethan as the brilliant young chef we're proud to call family. Ethan came out of the kitchen in his whites. He looked good, confident, in his element. Until he saw me at the bar. His face went pale for just a second before he recovered. He gave his speech, talked about the menu, the philosophy, the years of development. My approach to low country cuisine is rooted in deep respect for tradition, he said. I've spent years developing these recipes, testing them, perfecting them, and tonight I'm proud to share them with you. I set down my water glass, he'd said, developing. Like he'd created them from nothing. Like 3 generations of Mercer women hadn't stood over hot stoves perfecting every measurement, every technique, every secret. Ethan caught my eye across the room. I held his gaze steadily. He looked away first. The first course was served. Granny May's she-crab soup. I watched people taste it. Watched their eyes close in pleasure. Watched them compliment Ethan, who accepted the praise with gracious nods. That soup was May Mercer's recipe. She'd developed it in 1958, working in a Charleston kitchen where she wasn't even allowed to eat in the dining room. She'd cooked for wealthy white families who praised her food and never learned her last name. And now her great-grandson was serving it to wealthy people in a restaurant that bore no trace of her existence. Something in me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a clean, quiet break, like a thread being cut. I stood up, walked to the center of the room, excused myself into the space where Richard had given his speech. The room quieted. Ethan stepped forward from the kitchen doorway. "Mom," he said warningly. "I'd like to make a toast," I said. My voice was clear and steady. Caroline moved toward me. Richard put a hand on her arm. "Let her speak," he murmured. Smart man. He could read a room. I looked around at these people. These strangers eating my family's food in my family's building. "My name is Margaret Mercer," I said. "I'm Ethan's mother. I'm also the owner of this building." Several people shifted in their seats. Ethan closed his eyes. "And I'm the trustee of the Mercer Family Trust, which holds the copyrights to every single recipe on tonight's menu." The room went completely still. These recipes were created by my husband, Frank Mercer, and his mother, May Mercer. May was a cook who started with nothing and built a catering business that eventually allowed her to buy this very building in 1987. Frank perfected her recipes over 30 years. He registered them with the Copyright Office because he knew they were worth protecting. I looked at Ethan, and they are worth protecting because they represent something more than flavor profiles and plating techniques. They represent generations of work, of love, of a family that put everything they had into feeding people well. Ethan was staring at the floor. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I continued. "I'm here because this food deserves its true story. And so does this restaurant. It wasn't built from nothing. It was built on the shoulders of people who never got credit, who never got their name on a website or a magazine article." I raised my water glass. "So I'd like to toast May Mercer, who bought this building with money she saved $1 at a time, and Frank Mercer, who could make you cry with a bowl of shrimp and grits." and every person in every family who cooked with love and never got a thank you. The room was silent for 3 full seconds. Then a woman near the front began to clap, then another, then the whole room. Not because they were on my side or against Ethan, because the story was true, and true stories have power. Ethan walked toward me. His eyes were red. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I know you are, but sorry is just a word." I pulled the document from my purse. James Calloway's carefully drafted terms. "I'd like to discuss this with you and the Ashfords." Tonight, after the dinner, Richard Ashford appeared beside us. He'd read the room perfectly. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, his voice measured, "I think we owe you a conversation." "Yes," I said. "You do." We met in the private dining room after the guests left. Me, Ethan, Caroline, Richard, and Judith. James Calloway on speakerphone. I laid the terms on the table. Full credit to the Mercer family on all recipes. Licensing agreement. Back rent paid. Advisory board seat. Public acknowledgement. Richard read the document carefully. He was a businessman. He understood leverage. He also understood that I could terminate their lease and revoke recipe authorization, which would gut the restaurant overnight. "These terms are reasonable," he said finally. Caroline opened her mouth. Richard silenced her with a look. "More than reasonable given the circumstances." Judith spoke for the first time all evening. She'd been watching me quietly. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, "I owe you an apology." I looked at her. I encouraged Ethan and Caroline to present the restaurant a certain way. I thought the Ashford name would carry more weight than the truth. I was wrong. Richard nodded. "We'll sign tonight." He looked at Ethan. "And your mother deserves a seat at this table. Not just tonight. Always." Ethan looked at me. His eyes were full of something I hadn't seen in years. Shame, but also recognition, like he was finally seeing me. "Mom," he said, "Dad would have loved this restaurant. He would have loved it more if his name was on it," I said. Ethan picked up the pen, signed every page. Caroline signed after him, lips pressed thin but silent. Richard and Judith signed last. After the Ashfords left, Ethan and I sat alone in the dining room. The kitchen staff had gone home. The candles were burning low. "I took Dad's recipes," he said. "After the funeral. I found the binder in the nightstand, and I just took it. I know. I wasn't thinking about ownership or credit. I missed him, and cooking his food was the only way I could feel close to him. I understand that. But then the restaurant happened, and Caroline's parents got involved, and suddenly it was about branding and image, and you couldn't admit that your best recipes came from a fishing boat captain and his mother, who started as a house cook." He put his face in his hands. "I was ashamed, Mom. Not of Dad, not of you. Of where we came from. Of being the kid from Beaufort whose mom was a nurse and whose dad caught shrimp for a living." I reached across the table and took his hands. "There's no shame in honest work, Ethan. Your father fed hundreds of people from that boat and that kitchen. Your grandmother fed thousands. They built something real, something that tasted like love, and you have that same gift." He was crying now. "I don't deserve to cook their food." "Yes, you do. But you don't deserve to erase them while you do it." He wiped his eyes. "Can you forgive me?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised who'd broken my heart, who was sitting in front of me with his father's hands and his father's talent and none of his father's humility. "Not yet," I said honestly, "but I'm willing to work toward it." 3 months later, the Heritage Table was featured in Southern Living magazine. The article told the real story. Chef Ethan Mercer's restaurant is built on 3 generations of Mercer family recipes, starting with his grandmother May, a self-taught cook from Beaufort, who built a catering empire and invested in Charleston real estate. Every dish on the menu carries her legacy, refined by Ethan's father Frank, and now reimagined by Ethan himself. The article included a photo of me, Ethan, and a framed portrait of May and Frank. The caption read, "3 generations of Mercer cooking." I had the article framed and hung it in my kitchen next to Frank's photograph. They finally know your name, I told him that morning. The restaurant was a success. Real success, built on truth instead of pretense. Ethan called me every Sunday now, not out of obligation. He'd show up in Beaufort on his days off, sit in my kitchen, and cook his father's recipes while I watched and corrected his seasoning. More salt, I'd say. Your father always said people are afraid of salt. We were rebuilding, slowly, carefully, with the kind of honesty that only comes after something has been thoroughly broken. Caroline and I would never be close, but she'd stopped calling my house charming and started calling it Ethan's home. That was enough. On a Thursday evening in September, I sat on my porch watching the sun set over the marsh. My phone rang. Ethan, Mom, I want to add something new to the menu. A dish that's yours. Not Dad's, not Granny May's. Yours. I smiled. I make a pretty good peach cobbler. I know. That's the one I want. We'll call it Margaret's Peach Cobbler. I listened to the marsh birds calling across the water. Frank's photograph watched me through the kitchen window. Okay, I said, but I'm coming to Charleston to teach your pastry chef how to make it right. I wouldn't have it any other way. When we hung up, I sat on my porch and finished my coffee. The evening air smelled like salt and gardenia. The cardinals were at the feeder. The house was quiet, but it wasn't lonely anymore. It was just mine. I'd spent 63 years being what other people needed. A wife, a nurse, a mother, the woman in the background, the one who kept everything running so everyone else could shine. I loved those roles. I'd choose them again. But I was done being invisible in them. I was Margaret Mercer, retired nurse, property owner, keeper of recipes, builder of something that would outlast all of us. And for the first time in 8 years, that was more than enough.